and we have been able to open it also to non-law students and the general public as well. Today, we're pleased to have a special ad hoc or emergency session to deal with a particular problem that we're facing right now, which is to say a substantial influx in anti-Semitism reports that we've been receiving over the past few weeks. Over the 20 years or so that I have been working on issues of campus anti-Semitism and the 10 years that I've been at the Louis D. Brandeis Center, I can't think of any time where we have had more contacts from students, faculty, community professionals, and others telling us about the problem that they're facing. And it seemed to me, given the challenges of dealing with this overwhelming surge, at least that I'm seeing, that I wanted to talk to some of the smartest lawyers that I know in this field to get a sense of whether they're seeing it too, and whether they're seeing a problem right now over the past weeks that's bigger, different, more significant or severe than what we had seen in the past. And either way, what their thoughts were on how we as lawyers can fight back against the anti-Semitism that we're seeing, either on the college campuses or otherwise. And I'm very pleased that I've been able to assemble three of the best lawyers in the field, and not just to have this conversation with them, but to be able to share it with you as well. We have my friend Yael Lerman, who is the director of the Sadoff Center, the Sadoff Legal Department at Stand With Us. She heads a legal team with 4 staff attorneys, and she also has been able to recruit something like 200 pro bono attorneys to join in the legal battle. We have been very pleased for many years to be able to work with Stand With Us, and I'm very glad that we'll be able to hear Yael's thoughts today. We also have Rabbi Dr. Mark Goldfeder. He's also a friend that we've been able to work with for many years. Earlier on, during the period when he was teaching at Emory Law School, and when he was a well-loved supporter and I think a mentor for the Louis D. Brandeis Center's law school chapter at Emory Law School a few years ago. He is now the head of the National Jewish Advocacy Center, and so we are enjoying working with him in this newer capacity. And then my colleague at the Brandeis Center, Alyza Lewin. She is the president and general counsel of the Brandeis Center, very experienced lawyer and litigator, partner in the law firm of Lewin and Lewin, former president of the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, and a widely published writer and prolific speaker on these issues. So these are the people that you want to hear from if you want to understand these issues. I'm going to turn first to Yael Lerman. We'll have each of the 3 speakers, and then afterwards an opportunity to see if there are questions or for some discussion. To the audience, I would suggest that if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A section for this webinar. Yael, thank you for joining us today. What are your thoughts on what we're seeing and what we can do about it?
So first of all, thank you so much, Ken and Brandeis Center for having me and for hosting this critical meeting. I would say that I've been doing legal intake since 2006. So first at the ADL and now at Stand With Us. And we are experiencing a tidal wave of requests for legal help like I have never seen before. This includes college students, high schoolers, middle schoolers for the first time, community members, social media complaints, workplace issues. It's across the board, it's pervasive. To break it down at Stand With Us, we're receiving 4 new requests for legal help a day. Usually we receive 1 a day on average. That's a 75% increase. It's exploding. So what does this mean? The fantastic news is that people are reporting incidents like never before. And on the other hand, it's very worrisome. So I'd like to just focus on some trends that we're seeing now. A trend that is continuing, that is not new, is it's not a coincidence that BDS votes and anti-Israel activity is scheduled to coincide with Jewish holidays, this year on Shavuot, on Shabbat, and on finals. They are purposely using Jewish observance and a Jewish desire to study and do well in school to silence Jewish voices and immobilize the community. But in the last few weeks, we're seeing some new trends besides this. The first I would say is because everything's on Zoom these days, public university meetings, BDS votes, are on Zoom. And so there's now a whole new way to silence Jewish students. They're literally being silenced, and that Jewish senators are being blocked from even getting on the Zoom. They can't even place their votes. Chat boxes are being disabled when Jewish students start voicing opposition. Jewish and Zionist voices are illegally being kept out of decision-making in student government. This is incredibly troubling. I'd say we're also seeing a proliferation of student governments and academic departments making anti-Israel statements like we've never seen before. It's left and right, and many university administrations are responding, but many are remaining silent or only condemning it weeks later. And this gives the impression of tacit official approval to anti-Semitic and anti-Israel student government and faculty activity. It gives the appearance that the university approves of BDS. And lastly, I would say it's what we're seeing online. And yes, as someone just said in the chat, this is absolutely happening in Canada. I'm going to focus on the US, but Stand With Us also works in Canada, and we're seeing the same things there. So what else are we seeing online? We've always seen anti-Israel and anti-Semitic comments being made online. The way it's now impacting students, I would say, is a little bit different and a little bit more aggressive. It's not only the normalizing of anti-Semitism by targeting Jewish social media accounts, it's that they're flagging pro-Israel posts and getting pro-Israel accounts suspended for weeks at a time while the Jewish user tries desperately to appeal and get their account back up. But in the meantime, they're silenced. It's haters making criminal threats online against Jewish students. So for example, a student reached out that someone had taken a picture of her home, put her name on the top, said, you know, Jewish student name, we're coming for you. Literally, the Goyim are coming. It said, had her address on there and then posted this as a meme. That's terrifying for a student and for anyone. And this is not unique. We're seeing this around the country, and it's scary for students. And so just to sum up, what I would say is that the anti-Semitism we're seeing right now is different ways of silencing Jews and making them afraid to stand up and fight back. And of course, this is in addition to the vandalism and physical attacks we're seeing around the country. I'll stop there, and maybe later we can talk about some of the ways to fight back, because there are absolutely ways to fight back, and we do fight back every time.
Thank you, Yael. Mark Goldfeder, what are your thoughts and observations on this?
First of all, again, I want to thank the Brandeis Center for putting together this conversation. And I'll echo what everyone said. It's been an unbelievably busy couple of weeks. I met with a student group this morning at one university where the students were receiving threats over direct message on Instagram from other students and other student groups, meeting with another one this afternoon, where there have been bias reports filed and the university has done nothing to help. People are certainly feeling overwhelmed. And I think that it's important to try and figure out a systematic way of dealing with this influx. I think there's been a tremendous shift in the last few weeks. One of the biggest problems that we see generally is the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and the purposeful obfuscation of people who want to do anti-Semitic things and then claim they're just advocating for Palestinian rights. And that's bad enough when that happens. But the shift that I've seen over the last few weeks, which is terrifying, this last battle or conflict, whatever you want to call it, in Israel wasn't between the Palestinians and Israel over Tuesday. This was Hamas, a designated U.S. terrorist organization, and the complete and utter lack of recognition on the part of these quote unquote liberal groups that are siding with terrorists, and the mental disconnect between groups that claim to advocate for moderation, liberty, et cetera, but are working with groups that are anti-women, anti-LGBT, forget anti-Semitic, is hard to deal with. And it's hard to sort of break through. You know, it's very hard to convince anybody. We're playing a lot of defense these days. You know, I mean, multiple times over the last few weeks, we've had some success in getting schools to tone down the BDS statements that they're putting out in support, but it's a very defensive strategy. And so I think that one thing we want to do is, and I'm sure Alyza will talk about this more, there's an opportunity here, which is for everyone who claims and says that they, pretends that anti-Zionism is unrelated to anti-Semitism, and people fight against the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, because it contains some examples of what they'll call problematic anti-Zionism. The last few weeks should have been not only clarifying, but embarrassing for those people. And again, in countries around the world, anti-Semitic attacks have shot up between 400% and 500%. And right here, we've seen it in Los Angeles, in New York, and Michigan, hundreds of synagogues, Jewish community centers, kosher restaurants, Jewish businesses, individual Jewish people targeted and attacked and beaten and bullied and cursed just because they're Jewish. Horrible images of people running down the streets, people who, by the way, don't necessarily even support Israel, but who are clearly visibly Jewish. And I think that has sort of taken that thin veneer of anti-Zionism off the latent anti-Semitism, and it's demonstrated quite clearly why exactly we need this. And by the way, none of this is surprising. In 2015, right after the last Gaza war, there was a 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents as well. One of the main differences is that politicians like Bernie Sanders gave speeches that year saying, you have to understand, Hamas uses human shields. And those politicians have shifted so far over that it's, again, it's very hard to believe. But if we can take this moment as a teachable moment for university administrators, for government officials, all of whom have a responsibility to protect their citizens or their students from acts of hate and bigotry that's motivated by discriminatory animus, including anti-Semitism, and tell them that here, we're going to give you a tool to do that. It's no longer acceptable today for officials that are protecting people from anti-Semitism not to have a definition. And I think the last few weeks have taught us it's equally unacceptable for people to insist on a definition of anti-Semitism that doesn't include anti-Zionism when it becomes anti-Semitism. So I think that we have to work on getting that adopted at a much quicker rate. And I also think that we have to be very clear, and again, Alyza will probably delve into this more. No one is saying that anti-Semitic speech should be criminalized or contained. You should just label it correctly. And that's all we're asking for in terms of that. And universities should use their platforms, and government officials should use their bully platforms to call out anti-Semitism when it exists, and not just in the all lives matter format that we've been seeing. So I'll leave that there for the introduction.
Thank you, Mark. Alyza Lewin, what are your thoughts on this? Alyza, I believe you're muted.
Thank you for pointing that out. It's good to be here with Yael and with Mark and with you to respond and follow up on some of the comments that both of them have made. So I think Mark's right that there is an opportunity here, right, with the explosion of that we've seen in terms of the anti-Semitic incidents. I do think that the opportunity is not just in terms of educating the administrators, but I actually think that many of the Jewish students even were taken aback, and it goes beyond just campus, by what they saw as the reaction to the recent events in Israel, and then the reaction to the uptick in anti-Semitism. I think that there were students who were shocked that people they considered allies, people who they felt they were standing up as Jews for those communities, appeared to be silent in the face of this massive upsurge of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic violence. I mean, actual violence, hunting down Jews and physically attacking Jews. And I think that was a wake-up call for many students. I also think that students were disheartened at a minimum to discover that folks who they thought were allies and who might have been criticizing Israel because they wanted to see change in Israel's policies because the ultimate end goal was coexistence. I think they suddenly realized, many of them, that some of those partners don't believe that Israel as a Jewish state has a right to exist at all. So they suddenly realized that folks who they may have been standing arm in arm with saying, we oppose the occupation, have very different goals than they do. And the opportunity that that gives us as the Jewish community is the chance to say, you know, we really have to recognize that there are enemies of the Jewish people, that they're enemies of the Jewish state. And that what the Jewish people have to do is unite as the Jewish people and overcome whatever differences we may have in order to combat the external threat. Because history and the Jewish people's long history has shown that when we're united, we can overcome anything. It's when we're divided and fight among each other that we suffer. So the opportunity here, I think, is to be able to try and unite much more of the Jewish community against what the real threat is. And we see it, as I say, the line now between attacks on Israel and Israel's actions and then subsequent violence against Jews is clear, right? What happened on social media was that you had this massive outburst on social media of attacks on Israel and Zionists and the spreading of what was essentially modern day blood libels, right? Accusing Israel of ethnic cleansing, suggesting that Israel is trying, because of what was going on in Sheikh Jarrah as part of this property dispute, to ethnically cleanse Jerusalem of Arabs is patently false. In 1967, there were maybe approximately 60,000 Arabs in Jerusalem. Today, there are approximately 350,000 Arabs in Jerusalem. Whatever that is not ethnic cleansing. Suggesting that it's ethnic cleansing is no different than suggesting, like the ancient blood libels did, that Jews were killing Christian babies in order to use their blood for matzah. It's false. And the reason for spreading it is nothing more than to justify discrimination and ultimately violence against Jews. It's meant to try and dehumanize and demean and marginalize and ostracize Jews. And that's what we see. That's what Yael was describing. It starts with just excluding the Jews from participating in their society, right? The Jews are being cut out of the communications of the chat groups. They're being shut down when they start communicating, of being able to express their positions on Zoom debates when the student governments are debating issues of concern to Jews. Jews are being pushed out of their positions in student government. They're being pushed out of their positions and in progressive clubs, in progressive spaces. That's how it starts. And then it goes and moves on to actual violence. And I think what we have to get the broader community to understand is that this is not just what happens with the Jews, right? If you have unrelenting social media that targets a community and seeks to demean them and dehumanize them and attack them, ultimately what that does is that creates an atmosphere that tolerates discrimination of that group. And that's what we as a society have to combat. We have to push back against that. And that's the education that I think we have to do for the administrators as well as society at large. And we can talk as we open up this discussion a little bit about how we've used, specifically with university administrations, Title VI to put the legal pressure on the universities, because universities do, as Mark said, right, have a legal obligation to protect their students from unlawful harassment and discrimination. And if these communities and if Jewish students are being targeted in this fashion, are being marginalized and ostracized in this fashion to the point where they are being cut out of participating fully in the student educational opportunities, and student government is an educational opportunity. Universities don't need student governments. The reason they're there is to provide students with the educational opportunity and experience to learn the democratic process. But if Jews are being excluded from that process, that's a violation of Title VI that the universities have to act and have to respond to. So I'll leave it there, but I think we can open it up to conversation and questions.
Thank you, Alyza. Thank you all. I'm going to have a question or two for the panel in a moment, but I'd also like to remind members of the audience that if you have questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box. We have, I think, a particularly impressive audience group as well. And we're joined from several countries, not just by our law students, but from professors in multiple fields, law as well as other fields. I know we've got communal professionals and other members of the general audience, as well as our students. So again, please feel free to put things in the Q&A box. But I'd like to start with a question. So I think all three of you have confirmed my observation that the influx of cases that we've gotten over the last few weeks is utterly unprecedented. Certainly in my experience over the last 10 years in the Brandeis Center and 20 years dealing with this, it's been huge. If someone had asked me just several weeks ago in the middle of the spring semester about the volume, I would have said, you know what, considering that so many campuses are basically closed from COVID, it is appalling that we have any cases, and yet the number of students and professors coming to us with problems, even though they're not actually on campus in most cases, it's just alarming that it persists, although it's gone online and probably has increased. But that was a few weeks ago. That was like a million years ago. What we've been seeing since then, and you've just described it, I think all three of you, what we've just been seeing has just been absolutely shocking and extraordinary, both in the volume and in the nature. So my question is going to be about why such a huge escalation. Israel has had conflicts in the past. This may be different, but there have been other conflicts. Why is it that right now we are having such a massive amount of not just anti-Semitic activity, but some of it very personal and very, very extreme? And if you have, Yael, do you have thoughts on that to start?
Sure. Yes, I have a few thoughts. The first, I think, is without a doubt, it's social media. The last time we had a war like this was 2014. We didn't have Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and all the others in the way that we have now. I think exactly because we are not in person, people feel emboldened to say things that maybe they wouldn't have the courage to say in person. It just creates a veneer that they're protected in some way from awful, hateful speech. And it also makes Jews maybe not real to them. And I think that has a huge part of it. I think also it's the influencers that unfortunately are informing people on what their views should be. And these influencers know nothing about Israel. They're totally misinformed. I don't necessarily think they're evil. They just don't know. And they're saying things that have real repercussions in terms of anti-Semitic activity. I was just telling you at the start when everyone was filtering in that my high school daughter was in the bathroom and overheard girls saying how they would never be friends with Jews. I don't think this is a comment we would have heard 10 years ago, but they're seeing celebrities and they're seeing all sorts of people online saying that it's okay to have those views now. And they're not seeing administrations coming down and saying that it's not okay to have those views. So suddenly anti-Semitism is normalized and people are very comfortable having those views. And I'll let other people jump in. I also want to talk about solutions because I think it's very important that we not feel discouraged because there's phenomenal solutions out there. I think we can be very empowered as a community, and I do want to try to focus on that.
That is important, Yael. Either Mark or Alyza, did you want to address the question of the massive influx before we turn to the solutions issue? Mark?
Sure. Okay, I'm not muted. Sorry. Yeah, I first of all, I want to address that question, but I also want to address a comment that I saw on the chat here about the intersectionality question and other minority groups and how they relate to anti-Semitism and why they're not our allies. And I think, first of all, why did we see an influx of anti-Semitism during COVID? It's, as you said, it's very unexpected, but part of it, I think, comes down to the question of why anti-Semitism persists. And there's no one answer, but one thing that I always come back to and former Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks used to say that one root cause of anti-Semitism is the cognitive failure of scapegoating. And when bad things happen to a group, its members can ask one of two questions. What did we do wrong and how can we get better? Or who did this to us and what are we going to do to them? And a group that asks what they can do differently in the future will move forward, but a group that asks who else they can blame will start to persecute the people who look the most different. And it's been a really hard year for people. And a lot of what I've seen in terms of the COVID anti-Semitism focused on scapegoating and blaming Jews for viruses and some of that language coming back from almost middle-age plague stuff. And so historically, the Jews have been the most different. But again, and this is where Rabbi Sacks really points out, the underlying problem isn't the Jews. It's the society's unhealthy inability to tolerate difference. And because everyone is different, including all of those others, intersectional groups, the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. Anti-Semitism is the most reliable early warning sign of a major threat to freedom, and it matters to all of us, which is why we have to fight it together. And that should be our message to the other groups.
If I could just piggyback on what Mark just said, because I think it's absolutely correct. I mean, that's the history of anti-Semitism, is scapegoating and scapegoating the Jew. One of the things that maybe in today's society now makes it even more problematic is that rather than the Jew being seen as exemplifying difference and our need to celebrate differences should involve looking to the Jew as a model for that kind of tolerance and acceptance. Unfortunately, what's happened is the Jewish experience in many ways has been erased, right? That's this new form of erasive anti-Semitism. So seeing the Jews as a unique, distinct heritage, a unique, distinct culture, a unique, distinct people that is to be welcomed and celebrated with their full richness of their identity. Instead, we've ended up with almost this caricature of the Jew, which is, it feeds into the anti-Semitic tropes, right? The caricature of the Jew that's been put out there is the Jew as the white supremacist, oppressor, colonialist, racist, right? And so that was already being built by some of these intersectional partners, that was the Jew. And because that was already the picture, the caricature of the Jew going into what we just saw happen now in Israel, on social media, it just took off and fed right into that narrative.
If I can just comment, that erasure feeds into some of the problematic anti-Zionism as well. Lisa, you and I actually got an email together yesterday from a university administrator where they were dealing with a university that felt uncomfortable saying that Israel wasn't a racist endeavor, right? That was what they said. And again, just the amount of erasure it takes to call Israel a colonialist settler state is to erase and negate thousands of years of Jewish history and continual Jewish presence in those areas. And again, we've let this, maybe it's because originally we didn't want to give credence to these ideas by even responding to them, but the land was not given to the Jews and it wasn't stolen from anyone else. People came from around the world to buy and cultivate land and expand existing Jewish communities. And again, this isn't just Jews talking. When it happened, Winston Churchill, who was the Secretary of the State for the Colonies, he actually wrote that it's important that the community should know, in order to have the best prospect of free development, that they are not in Palestine on sufferance, they're there as of right. And we've forgotten that. And again, every time that a university puts out a statement that calls Israel a colonialist settler state and that tries to impose this narrative onto Jewish history, that's also a form of erasure that feeds into the negation of the Jewish experience.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, we've got a number of questions that have come in, but I wanted, before we go to those questions, to take you up, Yael, and I think also Alyza, on your suggestion that we have a little more discussion of legal solutions. Yael,
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
I'll try to kick it off. I do want to say to everyone in the chat, if we don't get to you and the questions are so important, please reach out to any of us. All of our organizations are there to provide free legal help to any of you, and we'll put our emails in the chat box. please reach out if your question doesn't get answered, because they're all important and they all need answers, and we have those answers for you. So first I'd like to just say two solutions that are not legal solutions that anyone can do and that make a huge impact, which is that while legal solutions are important, to put this crudely, Jewish money talks, and administrators are still listening to that. And so if you are a donor to a university, if you're alumni, make your voice heard. That is having a huge impact. I've had multiple discussions with major donors in the last few weeks who are reaching out to universities, coming out of the woodwork and saying, we're not okay with the anti-Semitism we're seeing on this campus. This is anti-Zionism, is anti-Semitism, and it's making a difference. So use your voice. And the other is we need evidence. So a student called me last week that she was walking down the street on her campus, and suddenly she came upon an anti-Israel rally where they were screaming over and over again. I'm not going to say the curse word, but F Jews, F Jews, F Jews. She said it was terrifying. It was Shabbat. She didn't have her phone. She didn't record. We can't find any evidence of it. But obviously, if we had that evidence, we would immediately go to the university and demand action. So please get that evidence and then come to any of our groups and we will help fight back, but we need the evidence. Take the screenshots before they disappear. Take the videos. And I'm going to say right now, don't worry about whether it's a consent jurisdiction or not and privacy laws and all that. Just get the videos. We'll deal with that after. And let's collect that as a community. And then just in terms of some very quick legal solutions, I think it comes down to two things, and that's mainly based on education. So Stand With Us, we're an education organization, and we have spent the last few months giving dozens and dozens of legal presentations to students and community members, and we will spend the whole summer doing this as well. If students know what their rights are, and they know that there's legal groups here who are available to help them fight back, they are stronger, and they go back to campus stronger, and they know that they're not alone. So we must educate students, we must tell them what their rights are, and then we must let them know that we're here to support them when they want to fight back. And the other thing is we must demand of universities and anywhere, workplaces, schools, high schools, middle schools, equal application of laws and policies to Jews. There isn't one set of laws and policies that applies to other minority groups that doesn't apply to Jews. There's no double standards here. I had a student call me last week that her club, her academic club, is saying that they can't come out with a statement on anti-Semitism because it's too political and contentious, but they have plenty of statements about other minority groups and condemning racism and things against those groups. No more double standards, no more different laws for Jews and for everyone else, and we must come together as a community to demand that and not let universities and clubs and academic departments get away with without equal application of laws for Jews as for everyone else.
Thank you, Yael. And of course, we are routinely urging all of our students and supporters to comply themselves with all applicable laws and university policies, and all of our groups can counsel them on that as well. Alyza, I think you mentioned that you would also like to say a word about legal solutions.
So, well, specifically, and I mean, we can talk about Title VI, but I think Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, as we've mentioned, does require the universities to protect the students and ensure that they have equal access to all the educational opportunities that the universities provide. And when you see this type of tactic that works to exclude Jews, that works to intimidate and frighten Jews and silence them and push them out from their community on campus, the universities are obligated to take action. They can't remain silent. They can't stand by and say, sorry, this is just a speech issue and we will, we're mute. The universities, at a minimum, have their own right to speech, right? And they need to be, as we started out talking about, using this as an educational opportunity, not only to protect the Jewish students, but to actually educate the community on how wrong and how divisive and how, anti-Semitism, as we all know, just eats away at society because it is based on this, falsehoods, conspiracy theories, that's and scapegoating. And they need to be able to explain to their community, we won't permit this, Because if we permit this with Jews, it's going to spread, right? It doesn't end with Jews. That's what history shows. And it will totally eat away at the fabric of our university. So.
Thank you. In the remaining 20 minutes, we'll get as many as we can of the questions that are.
Can I add one quick thing to the comments that were already made?
Go ahead.
One thing that I think it's important everyone can do as well is call your politicians and hold them accountable when they say things that are indefensible. And also, importantly enough, doesn't happen enough, thank them when they do the right thing, even if it's not your politician. If a politician stands up and does the right thing, 2-second call to their office on Google, you can find the number really easily and just say, thank you, someone from somewhere appreciates it. One more thing that we've been doing on some campuses in Georgia is initiating surveys, because even informal campus surveys just amongst the Jewish students or the Hillel groups. And the reason is because a lot of times when we talk to university administrators, they're unwilling to admit they have a problem. And, they say, well, everything you have is anecdotal. And yes, informal surveys are also anecdotal, but when we come and say, listen, 70% of the students that we have talked to fear to fully express their Jewish identity on campus, it's much harder for them to do that. And again, last thing I'll just say before we open up, from a legal perspective, insist on precision, right? Don't let people push you away with imprecise, it's very different in technology, in field. If you're programming and you do something wrong, your program won't compile and it will still work. But in law, even if you say something wrong, it compiles and people take it for granted. You can't let people tell you that this is a speech issue. It's not. Conduct is different than speech, and insist on that precision. In the same way that we need to insist on the precision in the broader conversation that Alyza said, genocide is not when there's been a 387% increase in the Arab population. It's just not true. You have to insist on precision in American law and make sure that people don't, allow us to get brushed aside with imprecise terminology.
Thank you, Mark. So we've got between 1 to 2 minutes per question, and then we could potentially get through most to all of them. I'd like to start with one of the law students. I've mentioned that this series began with the intention of helping to train the Brandeis Center's law students, our law school chapters and Jigsaw fellows. Everyone here has spoken at some of the campuses. One of the purposes is for these law students to be trained to work with the undergrads, because undergraduates sometimes feel comfortable speaking to law students in a way that they wouldn't necessarily talking to lawyers. So they hear even more than we do. One of the Brandeis Center's law students asks the following: when a student tells you, I am terrified of returning back to in-person on campus in the fall, what do you say to them?
So that's a wonderful question. And I love Brandeis Center program of training the JDs. It's fabulous. I'm so glad you do it. It's a unique resource in our community. I also want to just point out that it's the law students who have been playing a pivotal role in the last few weeks. So for example, when at Cornell, when the anti-Israel activists reared their head, it was the Cornell law students who wrote the most phenomenal response that has now become a model across the country on how do you respond to allegations of settler colonialism and apartheid and all that. So the law students have a huge role to play, and we're very grateful to you. And in terms of the question, I would say that there's probably two things going on. One is that they're afraid to return to campus just because everyone is afraid to return to campus. It's no longer the new normal. And they just need to get over that fear and move on with life. So there's a little bit, you have to play a little bit of the psychological hat. But the other is, if you're afraid as a Jew, the answer is we stand up, we fight back, we do not cower in our homes. I can tell you that in Los Angeles, right before Shabbat this past week, there was the vandalization of our most important kosher restaurant and one of our most important synagogues. And the rabbi came out with the most spectacular statement saying, Jews, you are to come to synagogue on Shabbat, and I expect to see all of you there. You are not to be in your homes afraid. And that is what I would say to students. If you feel physically threatened, go to campus police, go to the administration, let them know if there's a real threat, but don't cower as Jews. That doesn't work for us ever.
Thank you, Yael, and thank you for the kind words about our law students. Next question in the queue. Is it possible that there is a deliberately planned misinformation and disinformation campaign that is funded by foreign entities? Considering that Qatar donates millions to universities, there may be other ways these entities are enabling this hate to spread.
The short answer is yes. It is certainly possible, and there have been multiple published reports over the last several years of foreign influence, including from terrorist organizations in the BDS movement in particular. Jonathan Schanzer famously gave testimony to Congress on that subject. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to put some of the links into the chat where you can read them for yourself. Very detailed explanations. Tablet Magazine had a thorough investigation a couple of years ago tracing some of that money. So the answer is yes. Short answer, yes.
How would the decision to allow Fordham University to ban Students for Justice in Palestine affect Jewish groups? Could it be a precedent?
I love that case. That is one of my favorite cases of the last few years. As you may know, Students for Justice in Palestine and their attorneys tried to get an appeal of it several times, and most recently they were just rejected, and it looks like it's now done. Fordham has officially won, and there's nothing they can do about it. So that's a fabulous case. And for those who don't know, what it was is that Fordham University made the decision that they did not want SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, to form on their campus, and they denied them official recognition as a student group. And as a result, SJP sued and lost because Fordham, as a private university, has the right to make that decision. And I think, and I hope that it can become precedent at other universities. Of course, it has to be a private university. But it seems that SJP and its like have proliferated in so many places. I don't know how likely it is that it will become a precedent.
I think one of the things that is important about that decision is that in the opinion, it actually explained that the reason and the justification that the university gave was because the SJP was, I think, fostering this division in their tactics and their approach. And so the opinion basically made it clear that even if you had new students who tried in the future to reconstitute this, this organization, that justification would still apply. And so I do think that that recognition of how detrimental SJP often is to the fabric of a university community is important. And in that regard, it is an important precedent, and it is an important decision for university administrators to be aware of.
And just to piggyback on that briefly, I just want to give credit where credit is due. That line came from Aaron Eitan Meir, who's a pro bono attorney working in New York, and wrote the amicus brief for Stand With Us that we filed to the court in that case. And he, working with actually some law students, wrote that language that the court then took. So just a shout out to the wonderful work of pro bono attorneys and law students who are making a huge difference.
Excellent, and kudos to your extensive network of pro bono attorneys that stand with us, Yael. Excuse me. Next question, how do we respond to the pro-Palestinian statements made by professors?
I'll take that. You can't fall into the trap of making this about pro or not pro-Palestinian. You can be entirely pro-Palestinian, entirely pro a peaceful solution, and still not think it's okay for terrorists to attack Israel. And don't let that become the false dichotomy that takes this conversation over. In terms of responding to the specific ones, and I see there's another question in the chat a little bit, further on, is there a list of falsehoods that and facts people can present? I'm putting in the chat a recent article that I wrote for a community that asked me to write this because they weren't necessarily familiar with some of the legal terminology like genocide, apartheid, etc. It goes through some of the top legal myths and their response, but don't buy into that narrative. Reject the premise of the question. You can be pro-Palestinian and still think it's okay for Israel not to have rockets fired at it.
Yes, and I'll add, I'm going to also put in the chat, Stand With Us created a situation room that has lots of fact sheets to dispel a lot of the myths that were used in this last round of conflict. And I also am a big proponent of believing that we fight back every single time to every single professor. whether it's the professor who just makes the bland comment of, well, go to Al Jazeera and use that as your news source to the students in the classroom, to outright indoctrination. You fight back every time, and all of these groups here are here to help you do that, either by providing education or by providing the legal resources. I would add that right now, what I've been working on the most this week is responding to academic departments that are coming out making anti-Israel statements. And we must hold not only professors accountable, but academic departments as well. And I'll end there.
Very good point. We're seeing a lot of that too, and it raises very thorny questions. Next question in the queue. Can you identify the sources within social media who are generating the hatred?
It's a great question also. There's a lot of them, and they all seem to copy and find each other. I don't think there's any one source that can be pointed to, but there is definitely a need in our community to be educated and to respond. Something that we are going to be giving out a lot this summer to anyone who's interested is a social media action course. So it's going to be a one-time workshop on how do you respond on social media to the most common misconceptions. How do you deal with social media? And if anyone's interested in that, please contact us and we'll bring that to your community.
Yeah, and I'll add that I'm not tech savvy enough to really be able to fully answer that question, but there are groups that do work on this. Leora Rez, for example, at stopantisemitism.org, I'm putting her website into the chat, I believe does as much work as humanly possible on the anti-Semitism that you find on social media, trying to track it and trying to also repel it with Jewish influencers.
Next question in the queue ties into the prior discussion about political leadership. The silence from political leadership is deafening. Does this not give our enemies leeway to continue unabated and unopposed? Surely that would halt this anti-Semitism.
If only it was silence. Yeah. If only it was silence and not a guest essay in the New York Times by Bernie Sanders, who gave more cover to anti-Semites than anyone I could imagine in recent history. Yeah, no, it's an absolutely terrible thing, and people do need to hold them accountable, and people need to bring up their own prior statements. Again, I wish the Bernie, someone wrote this reason, I wish the Bernie from 2014 could talk to the Bernie from 2021 about Hamas human shields and see what happened in the interim and how did they become just a militant group and not a terrorist organization? Where did that shift happen? So yeah, if only it was silence. It's worse than silence. It does give cover to anti-Semitism, and we need to stand up for ourselves and remember that by calling them out on it and by voting against them.
I think we should acknowledge that some politicians have at least publicly acknowledged and condemned the recent anti-Semitism. For instance, President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Secretary of State Blinken all condemned the recent anti-Semitism. I think there are now a majority of members of the United States Senate who've joined a resolution, and certainly well over 100 members of the House of Representatives. So there's at least something being said by some politicians, which is better than we've seen during prior incidents.
Sure.
Ken, may I? Oh, sorry.
No.
I just want to jump in, if it's okay, with two things. This was a previous question, but I do want to tell everyone to go out and look for Dr. Mark Goldfeder's articles. Whenever something happens, within a day or two, he has an article with the legal arguments and just dispelling anything that you could imagine. Look up Sheikh Jarrah, look up Trevor Noah. Whenever something happens in the news, he responds, and it's usually the most concise, on-point response you could need on it. So I highly encourage you to look for his articles. And then, Ken, I'm going to do something that you're not supposed to do, which is ask a question of the moderator. Someone put in the chat a question that we all wonder about, which is, where does Title VI now stand? And we're all working hard to still file Title VI actions and gather the evidence for them. But you would probably know better than anyone else what would be the likely success of those. And whatever you are, or Alyza's at liberty to say, I would love to hear.
Well, Title VI, of course, remains and will be the law of the land. People have asked that question in two respects. One is, well, what about President Trump's executive order? And the other is, well, what about more generally the attitude of the Biden administration towards campus anti-Semitism cases? On the executive order, I think a lot of people have noticed that on the White House website, the Trump executive order on combating anti-Semitism was moved into the archive section, which seemed to send a disturbing signal. It is also the case that all of President Trump's executive orders were moved into the archive section. This does not have a legal effect. Just moving material from one side of a website to another does not have a legal impact, but the optics are not great. Having said that, President Biden has also formally rescinded a number of President Trump's executive orders, but he's not rescinded this one. And in fact, Biden administration officials have communicated to various members of the organized Jewish community that they will not do so. And of course, we know that Secretary Blinken and others in the administration have indicated that this administration embraces the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Moreover, the executive order isn't just on the website of the White House. More importantly, it was published in the Federal Register. It's now in the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR. So it is very much a formal part of our active guidance system within my former agency, the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. It was also incorporated into guidance that was issued in January of this year. That guidance remains active and effective and is in the active policy portal of OCR. In terms of the general approach of the Biden administration, I don't know that we've heard anything that has been very specific on the issue of anti-Semitism. So we don't yet know. There are a number of cases still pending before OCR. And there are a number of issues pending with the administration. My own view is that we should give them the benefit of the doubt. President Biden campaigned in part on his notion that fighting anti-Semitism has been a pillar of his public service career. While people have had mixed views of some of his nominees, President Biden's record, including during the Obama-Biden administration, does provide some room for hope. So I would personally at least give the benefit of the doubt to this still young administration, perhaps give them opportunities to do the right thing, perhaps give them suggestions and recommendations for how they can work with groups like ours to protect all students, including Jewish students, but also be aware that we don't yet know. If they do the right thing, as Mark Goldfeder just suggested, public figures should be applauded when they do the right thing. If they don't do the right thing, then we should hold them accountable, as is always the case. Forgive the moderator for going on too long. Next question from the audience. Why, and we have only 3 minutes remaining, why is there no coordinated Jewish attack on the influencers who are pushing hatred?
I would say that there are efforts at coordination. There's just a lot of haters, but we all are working hard to respond to them. And there's something called the focus group that every week brings different groups together with one message for press and for the community on how to respond on whatever's the relevant issue of the week. So I would say there are coordinated attempts. There's just a lot of noise out there.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that there was a question, I think, also about the faculty members and the professors. I know that, for instance, the Academic Engagement Network, AEN specifically, put together a response to the Gender Studies Department letter that went out, that was signed by many different gender studies departments at universities. But that was meant, I think, also as a model that other faculty could use. I know that there have been some other recent pieces that have gone out to try and serve as models. So I do think that there's an attempt to try and bring people together and create and provide these examples for folks to use so that we're all on the same message.
With just about a minute or so remaining, next question, and perhaps the last question for now, how have perceptions of the inner divisions within the Jewish community emboldened anti-Semitism in this country?
What it's done is it's enabled the anti-Semites to use Jews as cover. That's what it's done. It has, and the problem is there are some Jews who honestly support the positions of some of the anti-Semites, but many Jews don't realize, and that comes full circle back to kind of where I was at the beginning of this. I think that the recent incidents in social media kind of served as a wake-up call to some Jews who might have inadvertently been serving as that cover. I think they realize now that they're not necessarily on the same page. And that, I think, is an opportunity for the Jewish community. There will always be differences within the Jewish community, and there will always be some who choose to abandon the sense of Jewish peoplehood. But the overwhelming majority of the Jewish people feel very strongly that we are connected, that we do have to support one another, that we do have to join together when Jews are under attack. And I think that's become much more evident to a much broader swath of the Jewish population right now as a result. And so I do hope that that enables us to push back against this better than we have been.
Thank you, Alyza. Thank you all. Our time has run out long before the questions did. I think that's testament to the outstanding participants we have. I want to thank you all. Yael Lerman has suggested that people can write in to the participants, or the Brandeis Center can forward your questions if we haven't had a chance to get to them. I want to thank you all for signing on, and I would like to remind everyone that next Wednesday, June 9th, we have the next in our series of speakers, Mark Rotenberg, the top lawyer at Hillel International and a highly experienced university general counsel, will address the issue that we're facing repeatedly in trying to fight anti-Semitism on campus, which is academic freedom and the fight against campus anti-Semitism. Again, right here on the Louis D. Brandeis Center Summer Series. Yael, Mark, and Alyza, thank you all both for your participation, also for your partnership with the Louis D. Brandeis Center, and for everything that you are doing to support students in America. Thank you all.
Thank you.